to be taught to love and care.
You've got to be taught we share the air.
Let's try to remain aware of what is fair. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to learn not to be afraid
Of people whose eyes are differently made,
and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to love all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught.
Good afternoon. I am Alice Mong, Executive Director of Asia Society Hong Kong Center. I'm so delighted to see so many of you here in person, and we have an online audience. So I'm making an executive decision. I'm going to be interviewing our guests without mask, and so I just distance our chairs. I hope you enjoy that video, and the video kind of is inspired by our two speakers that I'm going to be bringing on shortly. And I think those of you who are familiar with musical theater, you know this came from South Pacific. And it's one of my favorite musicals. I know it's kind of dated, but the song we started, this is, if you notice, many of the singers in the video, some of them are from Broadway and some of them are local talents here in Hong Kong. And we were inspired to do this video. This is all produced by Asia Society Hong Kong, by the way. And it was after the George Floyd incident. In fact, I think we premiered it a few months after the George Floyd incident, the tragedy of George Floyd, and also because of the anti-Asian violence, that we were hearing in the U.S. and mainly because of COVID, and at that time, somebody in the White House calling it the China flu. So this video, I love this song is because you've got to be carefully taught. Original lyric, you'll notice we changed the lyric to care and love. The originally lyric, if you guys remember, you got to be taught to hate all the people your relatives hate. So thanks to David Henry Hwang, who introduced us to some of the talent from the U.S. We were able to produce this video, which and we got the rights to do that from the Roger and Hammerstein organization. So I'm really grateful. So today's program is something that I've been looking forward to. We're going to bring on two fantastic playwrights and also opera librettists, and also Friends of Asia Society, and we've collaborated and we work with both of them throughout the year. We've been here now in this site for over 10 years, and we've worked with David. I think this is his third or fourth program that David's going to do with, has been with us here at Asia Society in Hong Kong. And Candice Chong, somebody who's from Hong Kong. We work with Candice on our wonderful first commission by Asia Society Hong Kong, Mila, the opera that was presented in Tagalog, in English, and in Cantonese. That we took it on tour after premiere in Hong Kong. So I'm really delighted that both of these creatives, they are top of their field. One is in the U.S. and globally. I mean, David has been, I think his most famous play, M. Butterfly, came out, I believe, in 1988. And Candice has been really prolific, and also an ACC fellow, Candice Chong, and I first met Candice in New York when she came to New York on an ACC fellowship probably about 15 years ago. So I'm really delighted that today, this afternoon, we can bring you Candice Chong. Candice, can you come on stage? And then David Henry Hwang. And you can see their bio on our website. Candice has written many plays. In fact, Short Marriage, We Are Gay. And the first one I saw was Wild Boar here in Hong Kong about 9-10 years ago. And Candice, thank you. And David Henry Hwang, needs no introduction. I think David is probably the most famous playwright. Won a Tony. I remember I was so impressed to see an Asian Chinese, somebody who looked like me, winning the Tony Award, and also being very involved with the American Theater Wing. I think David also chaired it, and without David's work, I don't think Broadway would be would be a lot less diverse. I think David was one of the forefront when you. Like I said, 1988, there weren't that many Asian American playwrights, and now, so first part of this talk is going to be a conversation with David and Candice, and then second half of the program, we're going to bring up Ken Smith and Joanna Lee, again, great friends of Asia Society Hong Kong, to talk about what's happening in the U.S. and on Broadway right now. But I want to start off by asking. And another reason we're bringing the two of them here is Candice. I think David has been kind of being a mentor to Candice in some ways. Can you tell us how you first met, the two of you?
I think I first met David because I went to a reading in maybe Lark Theatre, and then the audience sitting next to me said that, "Oh, do you know David Henry Hwang?" And then, sorry, because at that time I didn't know much about about American playwrights. So he said, "Oh, you should check him up. I mean, his work you might find his work very meaningful to you." And so I checked, and then I realized that I actually know who's David Henry Hwang because I know M. Butterfly. Because when we were studying in APA, we studied the script before, and so I think before I read that, after that event, I think I come up to you and I introduce myself, and then David has is very kind, and because he left, I think we leave contact, and then we catch up, and then he's, I think it's very generous because you read my scripts before meeting me too, to understand me more, which is a very rare from a very famous people person. And then we start our friendship. That's how.
Yeah, that's basically the story. I don't really have a lot to add.
You don't
but-
remember anything
No, I
because
totally
everyone just come up to you and introduce themselves, right?
No, I remember, and I read French Kiss, and really enjoyed it, and felt like, oh, he's a very, not only is it a pleasant conversation, but she's a really good writer. So then it was pretty easy to hang out.
And then, so kind of fast forward, my understanding, some of your play was brought to the U.S. It was a signature or one of the theater. Your play, although it starts in Cantonese, many of them has been performed in the U.S. And I think David might have something to do with that to help you introduce you to some of the theater group that David worked with. Is that true?
Well, yeah, there was a year when we were trying to put together, I guess we did put together, a Chinese, what is it? Chinese
Signature
language,
theater?
yeah,
Yes.
play reading series. And so Candice represented Hong Kong, and
And we
we
chose
read Wild Boar,
Wild
right?
Boar, yes.
Which subsequently was produced in Chicago. At Silk Road. And then we also did...
For some reason, I remember, thanks to Hong Kong Arts Festival and Joanna Lee, who helped after the first translation. I think Joanna worked a little bit on the translation too, but the Wild Boar is translated by Joanna, right? Yes, sorry. Thank you. And then, while we did the reading rehearsal, David also helped polishing the script, and then that's why it is more closer to how performance standard, I would say.
The reason the title of today's program is Building an Audience for Asian and Asian American Creatives. And we came up with this because I love theater. I've been, I grew up in the States, and I remember first time seeing somebody, like David was 19. I think I saw M. Butterfly in 1991. It was touring in Columbus, Ohio. And from then on, I've always been fascinated with Miss Saigon. And remember Miss Saigon when it first came out? There were protests. I think some of you may not know this, but Jonathan Pryce was playing the engineer. And, nowadays, it's kind of he's playing, and it's kind of yellowface, right?
Yeah, it is Yellowface.
Right, it is yellowface. And I remember the protests on Broadway by a lot of the Asian American, and I think David had a role in that, protesting Miss Saigon's premiere. And now it seemed very passé, but in some ways, we're still having this conversation about identity and who can play whom, when, and what, right? But 1991 and seeing it, and then what I've been fascinated is just in this period of 30 years, seeing more. And then Candice, I saw Wild Boar about 10 years ago, I think shortly when it premiered. And I saw it in Cantonese, even though my Cantonese is not of it, but I still thought it was a great play in terms of, so that the journey of David to Candice and theater. And now what we're seeing on Broadway, and also not just Broadway, but television, movies. This year's one of the hottest movie is Michelle Yeoh's Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's been doing really well in the U.S. And then last year was Shang-Chi, right, the Marvel movie, which I haven't seen yet, but I will. And then this year also on Netflix, Partners Track. I mean, there seems to me a lot more content. And I know, I'm wondering, David, you can, and you're also involved in, both of you are involved in writing not just plays, but opera, TV shows, movies. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like, you have been able to jump back and forth. Talking about, I'm curious about the content. Now, is that the trend we're going to see of that? We're going to see more diversity, more people who look like us on all sorts of screens.
I mean, I think there is more of, first of all, an economic imperative because for better or worse, we sort of live in late stage capitalism. And so the profit imperative drives a lot of decisions. And where it comes to American audiences, we're in a situation where BIPOC people of color in America will be the majority in, 15, 20 years. Plus, the foreign marketplace is an increasingly larger chunk of how TV shows and movies make back their money. And so if you accept the proposition that people like to see themselves on stages and screens, then it's just a good business model to diversify. And this is what Hollywood, I think, has learned pretty substantially over particularly the last 5 to 10 years. And then, you start to see a diverse range of bodies and characters in, say, Star Wars or, Little Mermaid, and that is a testament to this sort of business model that before there was, I think, a feeling that, it would be really nice to have more diversity. And then the combination of there being a demographic imperative and then several movies and TV shows with people of color as the leads doing really well kind of pushed it to the next level.
And Candice, I think you, when your play was taken at Wild Boar, went to Chicago, and that was also one of the first time. I mean, usually, it's English, but yours is translated. And what was that like for you to see your Wild Boar being produced? And that's not the only one. You've had other, I think, French Kiss. So tell me about how kind of your journey, because you started off as a Cantonese playwright, but your content now is not just here in Hong Kong, but and also Sun Yat-sen as well is another one that you've been involved with, the opera with Hwang. So kind of talk about your journey. Did you start off writing mainly as a Cantonese writer, but now you have a global audience in many of your work.
I have to say, have to put a lot of works on translation, because I write my play in Cantonese, and then so when it's translated into English, I won't do it myself because my it's not good enough. So we will have someone to do it, and I will proofread it. However, if it translates to other languages, of course, it always need to have an English script to be the bridge. Instead from Cantonese to Korean or Cantonese to Japanese, I realize. So for me, I think it's a lot of works. So it really depends whether my script is lucky enough to have someone who pay for the translation, or sometimes I pay for the translation, and whether the translation did good enough. But I also realized that some plays okay to translate into other language like Wild Boar. But for other plays like Murder in San Jose, I always find it difficult because as for the Chinese version itself, it has several dialects in it. It has Mandarin and Cantonese and some of the Taiwanese. So when it translates into English, it lost some of the color. So I would say that I always hope to write a story which has a universal, we speak to the international audience. But I won't try too hard because writing my story in a good writing a good play is already hard enough. So I normally I don't think too much and then see what happened after that.
But it seems to me, I mean, our project that we work with you on, Mila, the opera that was sung in 3 languages, what I found interesting is you have found authentic voices in all 3, the 3 languages, because you work with your helper when it came to the Tagalog. And it's also nowadays with surtitle, translation, and so on. So you were able to, all the 4 characters in this opera, you gave them a voice, and it was the father sung in English, the mother in Cantonese, and the domestic helper in Tagalog, and the son was in Cantonese. So I thought that was it really didn't need to translate. That opera worked.
I really enjoyed that working process, but I have to say that because you suggested to have a different Asian language.
Yes, I
and
think
I
we
think
did.
it's very interesting because I have a helper at home, and then I can discuss with her, and then she help us to translate a little bit too, and then because you suggested, it's good to have different language, so I start to work on these ideas, and then found the story Miller. So that. So I was not the one who suggested it, but to working with people in different language and trying to put the different rhythm together is very interesting.
So I think, David, I want to talk to you now also about language in Chinglish. In fact, I think we have Larry in the audience, who was in the original cast. Larry, who's now working both in U.S. and in this part of the world. So language, Chinglish. It was here at the Arts Festival, and then I think I saw it in Chicago, I saw it in New York, saw it in Berkeley, and I saw it in Hong Kong. And the audience reaction was different in each of these cities. What did you learn from Chinglish, that experience?
Right. So we're having a bit of a Chinglish reunion in the house because Larry Chong, Lily Fan, who's
I
one
didn't
of
see
our
Lily. Welcome,
producers.
Lily.
Again, Ken and Joanna, who are involved with
Consultant.
just about everything that I do. And Candice and I worked on the show together because I kind of had this idea of doing a show that is would be bilingual, but I'm hampered by the fact that I myself am not bilingual. However, because we were buddies, I could go, would you do the translations for me? And I mean, it's interesting. I felt like the show probably, the show was super successful when we opened it in Chicago. And I felt like the Chicago audiences were very raucous. And we took it to Broadway, and it did okay, but it was less successful on Broadway. And I thought the audiences were good, but not as, just sort of the laughter was not as explosive as it was in Chicago. And then bringing it here to Hong Kong for the Arts Festival, I felt that the audiences were pretty explosive. Yeah, that there was a huge response from the audience that felt like they identified with things and understood things and picked up nuances and found things that were funny that American audiences didn't. But what was your experience?
Did we go to Singapore? I was thinking that this
It has been done
Chinglish.
in Singapore, but I wasn't there.
Oh, me neither. But I was thinking like places like Hong Kong or Singapore, they know very well the difference between the language and the joke about this. So I realized that they connect more with it. Do you think so?
Yeah, I felt that. I thought that it was, there was just an electricity in the audience here. I think more so than in the States.
Right now, I think recently, the last production I saw of yours was when I went to Santa Fe Opera. Thanks to David, got me tickets for the opening night of and Butterfly the Opera that you and Hwang has now made it. It started with the opera, remember, and then you made the play. And there was a revival in a couple of years ago on Broadway, and then now it's the opera based on the play. And the audience in Santa Fe was primarily, I would say, 95% white. Or it's an opera audience, right? And Santa Fe is very, in fact, the opera kind of, Santa Fe Opera won the Festival of the Year or Opera Festival.
Yes, the Festival of the Year award at the what do they call it? The International Opera Awards.
And primarily, I think it's because of the premiere of *En Butterfly*. Even though it didn't win the opera, it got nominated as one of the Opera of the Year. So what I found interesting at that audience, it was electrifying, in that this audience of very Santa Fe's opera. I've always wanted to go and to see that opera with the stage. The lead, the conductor, Taiwanese American woman, the two of you sitting in front of me, and it was just, but then the audience was primarily 99% white, upper crust, older audience, and they were really excited, and so I'm hoping, because of the reception of this opera, by that it will now travel throughout the other opera theaters around the world. Because think about it, there's only a few operas that's produced all the time, and there rarely is an opera that has Asian. Well, Turnando, I guess, is the one that I think of. So I'm hoping that will be the case. But I'm wondering how that opera will, if we will have a chance to see it here. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. Would you want to? I would like to see it here, but what do you think how the audience?
I mean, I'd like to see it here. So we don't. Yeah, we don't have a plan to bring it here. We are sort of trolling about for producers that if anyone is in the house.
Big cast?
It is. It's like a full opera. But again, there's an interesting connection here that. Hwang, the composer, the first opera that he did also in Santa Fe was...
do we have a doctor? Dr. Sonia Sen or just Sonia Sen? Dr. Sonia Sen. Yes.
And you worked on that.
with
Yes,
libretto by
libretto.
Candice.
Yes.
But maybe I think maybe because the subject is so, I think we know about it. So it seems like grass is greener on the other side. Dr. San Yat-sen has been performed, and then I think you are still working on some operas like in Maya Lin and with Hwang Ro. So one of the things I was talking to somebody recently about, just seeing diversity in certain genre. You're seeing in television, you're streaming, or you're seeing the movies, but you're not seeing it so much in opera these days, and at least not here. And so I'm just curious. Is that going to be a trend? And also you're not seeing that much diversity in. Well, again, but I guess I want to talk about identities. In terms of, you yesterday, I think we were at CUHK. You talked about kind of subverting, seeing something like the Rodgers and Hammerstein. The video we just showed, but you see something, and then in your version of soft power, kind of subverting that, your version of King and I. So can you talk about that part of you that are trying to do that and kind of engaging in conversation about identity politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think I grew up during a period when I often say if, I knew that there was a TV show or a movie that was going to feature an Asian character, I would go out of my way not to watch it. And I've been thinking lately, what does it mean? Like, how did it affect me to grow up in an environment where generally everyone who looked like me in the soft power of American media was either a joke or a villain? I mean, Asians are always the butt of the jokes, and what they were when I was a kid. And
they were always killed off.
Or they were killed off. And so part of my, I guess, work as an adult has been to try to gain access to kind of the levers of American popular culture, and then have conversations with these works that I felt kind of oppressed by, and figure out a way to reframe them through my lens. So, and Butterfly is obviously reaction to some extent to Madame Butterfly. Soft Power, which was my most recent musical that we did right before the pandemic, was a kind of reverse King and I. I just have this, a lot of my career has been about works in the American canon that pissed me off, that I kind of wanted to like screw around with.
That's good. That's very meaningful. I mean,
But
there was
Candice,
no-
but you like David is writing as a minority, Asian American. We're what, like 5 or less than 10% of the population in the United States. But you writing in your native language of Cantonese, and you're not a, but you are a minority as a woman. I mean, I don't know if you ever thought about you know, I don't know that many women playwrights. So have you ever? What is your take on writing as a in your, you know, Hong Kong, you grew up in Hong Kong. What inspired you? I've always been curious, like, what inspired you to become a playwright in Hong Kong? I mean, I grew up watching Hong Kong movies, Mandarin movies, as well as canto pops and stuff like that. But what inspired you to become a playwright?
I think I just love stories, and then writing express myself better, and I love writing. To be honest, I didn't think much about my the gender, except after having kids that you have to take care of kids. That's another story. But luckily enough, in Hong Kong's industry, I mean, I'm not sure about the movie industry, because maybe in the movie industry, I heard from some actress is quite unequal, but in theater, I see it's quite equal. I would say that I don't suffer much about from that. But I realized that in my first few plays, I tend to put male as my 主角係咩啊？
Lead.
Lead, yes. I don't know why. It's just my instinct. Maybe I feel like I need to fall in love with the lead. So writing male will make me fall more. I don't know. But I realized that I have some changes, because recent years, I tend to write more about women. So maybe it's my growth or something about that. So
No, but I think I'm just applauding both of you, because it's just seeing that diversity. I think it's all about diversity and inclusion. But in the world today, I think we just reached, 8 million 8 million people in the world. And if you think about it, Asians are not minority, right? And we are actually majority. But seeing so few of the roles, or the mainstream pop culture, I guess the mainstream culture is, you just don't see that much. But you also see, right now, the other day we had Diwali, when kids now are really into the Indian the Indian culture, Bollywood. And now the rise of K-pop. I mean, there just seems to be an interesting change, we're no longer seeing ourselves as the minority. And we did see ourselves in the minority, because growing up watching movies, if you're talking about Western films, Western blockbusters, I remember Joy Luck Club was the first time I saw a mostly Asian cast, and that was 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And then it took another 25 years to see Crazy Rich Asian, and I think the success of Crazy Rich Asian has really led to you're going to see more production. So I guess the question I have for you, both of you, is what kind of trend, you guys now are probably being very busy, because you have track records in writing, whether it's opera, plays, TV, or movie. So are you seeing an interesting, what kind of trend are you seeing? You talked about earlier about the economics and so on, but I guess another reason I want to ask is I actually want to see a lot more Asian writing, not just in the play acting, but I think in the producing, in all kind of the whole entire spectrum, the ecosystem. Are you seeing that, or is it just still spotty? And do you think the Bollywood trend and the K-pop trend is just kind of a flash in the pan?
Sorry, I want to get back to the question about minority, because when you talk about minority, I realized that recently, I mean, recent years, I feel like, I think I feel like part of my minority when I have to explain Hong Kong story, because people tend to think that all Asians are the same, but the big changes in Hong Kong is that I keep I realized that when I went to Awa, I keep explaining the differences between people from Taiwan, people from Hong Kong, people from China, people from Japan, and then especially Hong Kong, because we have a very complicated cultural and historical background, and so so it becomes my mission too. Is like I experience that sense of minority, and then how to capture the difference and how to tell the stories of such minority group in the coming new place. And then I will try to find a way which hopefully not breaking the law, but can capture our voices.
In terms of the trend question, I think at the moment there is clearly a big kind of Korean wave in world culture, world pop culture, and whether we're talking about in music with K-pop or in films with films like Parasite, or in television with Squid Game. South Korea becoming kind of a pop culture engine for much of the world has been a big explosive event over the past sort of 3 to 5 years. But what I do notice is, okay, so I started writing plays. One of the reasons being that I wanted to write about people who look like me and tell these stories, and really the only place I could do that was in the theater, because theater is frankly small enough. The economics, if we're not talking about Broadway, the economics are more accessible. So I could write shows with Chinese American, Asian American leads, and I was fortunate to get them produced. I always worked in film and television, by and large, to make a living, because you can't really make a living as a playwright. And it wasn't. It was always sort of a situation where if you were gonna write something set about Asians, it should probably be set overseas, because American audiences were more interested in sort of foreign Asians than Asian Americans, and the whole concept of Asian American was still kind of hard for the American population to assimilate. And then B, you had to figure out a way to put a white guy into it, which is why if you think about movies set in Asia over the past 30 to 40 years, there's usually, it's the white reporter, it's the white, so you just had to find a way to put a white guy into it. And in terms of trends, you don't have to do that anymore. And as a writer, as a creator, that is a huge shift in the paradigm. That in the way that I could only tell these stories, these sorts of stories, in the theater. Now I can tell them in film and television as well. And so there's something quite gratifying, I have to say, to be someone who tried to push for these kind of changes to happen, and then to see them taking place to some extent, and then also, still to be I wouldn't say young, but at least young enough so that I can still be working and take advantage of these new opportunities.
I think today's program is going to be an hour and a half, and right now I think this is a good time for us to bring up Ken Smith and Joanna Lee. And the reason, Ken and Joanna has been working with all of us here, and they're working in some really interesting projects in the U.S. right now. And especially when I invited them up to talk about that, and also talk about what they've seen, because both of them have worked in Hong Kong, in China, in Taiwan, in Asia, and also very much in the U.S. So, Ken and Joanna, can we ask you guys to come up and say if and talk about what you guys are seeing? Okay. I'm going to bring up. Yeah.
How are we going to sit? Okay.
You sit.
Where do I sit?
Okay. Thank you both for being back in Hong Kong. I think this last 3 years we didn't see as much as you except on Zoom, and both of you have been now. The exciting project that you guys are working on is K-pop, the musical that has just opened, and
Yeah.
tell us more about that.
Well, I'll say what the difference between Chinglish and K-pop. Let's just say a little snapshot. Chinglish, we had 5 Asian actors making their Broadway debut. Was that correct? Yeah. And that was a situation where I had to think about that. But and when we put the Asian Americans and the Asians together for that. But I remember talking with one of our actresses, and I said, "Well, how's it feel? You're on Broadway." And she just said, "Yeah, and it'll never happen again until David writes a play for me." And it was kind of a joke, but it wasn't.
Okay,
Oh.
remember that was 2011.
Now-
So let's have our dates all there.
Now jump 11 years, and now we have a show that had 18
18 Broadway debuts.
and David did not write
K-pop,
nor-
right? I mean,
nor-
that's
nor did he write lyrics. But it was a situation where, and that was a big story for them. But for me, I think the story was that there were 2 actors who were not making their Broadway debut. One was Eddie Lee and Zachary Noah Pizer, and the 2 of them were doing interviews with a bunch of Chinese journalists in the Chinese New York press, and hearing the 2 of them talk, it was like one person. I mean, they would say, "Well, what did you?" Well, I studied biology. I was in med school. Well, then you came to New York. Yes, I came to New York, and your parents really didn't want you to pursue. They did not want us to pursue a career in the arts. No. And then, well, I played the title role in Hamilton. The other one said, I played the title role in Dear Evan Hansen. And they were the first Asian Americans to actually play those title roles. And they both said very clearly to the journalists, 15 years ago, we would have never had a career. And they've managed to make it that far and to be on Broadway twice. And 2 very, very clearly successful performances in their part. Broadway, and one of the things that Joanna will jump in here in a minute, is not necessarily Broadway. I mean, we're talking about a dynamic here that Broadway are basically the television networks, if you're going to make that broad comparison, where a lot of the real excitement has been generated, has been off Broadway, has been in I won't say non-commercial, but certainly not New York main commercial thoroughfare. It's been in companies that are the equivalent of Netflix. It's been and sometimes you can't go to Broadway, but if you have a great show, you can. And Netflix has that. Well, you can go to Hulu, you can go to Amazon. You have many different outlets of theater than just Broadway.
Can I now jump in?
Jump in.
Thank you. Also, there's so much going on off Broadway, and I think David has seen quite a lot of them in the past few years of Asian American voices, and really a lot of these younger playwrights look at David as a mentor. But now we are seeing not just the second generation, but a third generation of voices, people who just starting off in their late 20s, early 30s. And another thing to say is that COVID did make life very, very different for the theater world, for everybody. And I remember because in the winter, right, early 2020, so this is just before everything hit, that was a spring season off Broadway in which we were supposed to have nine new plays or 9 new productions that involved significant Asian American creatives or content. And guess what? COVID ended them all, basically, for a long time. Or they got very much delayed, and some of them were so delayed that they were just actually getting on stage now. And I think the last really big Asian American piece that was off Broadway before COVID shut everything down was Cambodian Rock Band, and that's a great, great show. It's a musical about the Khmer Rouge. I know it doesn't seem to make very good sense, but it does, and it is fantastic.
And it's sort of a jukebox musical in that all of the songs are pre-existing by Dengue Fever, but the script is entirely not existing and really has nothing to do with the music itself, other than the characters were members of a band that were having their recording, their little about their moment to break into the public right when the city deconstructed. But you actually had ended soft power, yes? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so there was just a lot going on. But now we are also seeing, again, just in the past few months, a lot more, and it has been very exciting. And one of them was actually David's student, Golden Shield, Angeli Felicia King. And Golden Shield was at the Manhattan Theatre Club off-Broadway, had very good reviews.
And I think right now, with what I'm really curious now is really this crossover. One of the things with this talk with this program is really inspire Hong Kong and young people to think. I mean, in the story of you talking about the typical, parents don't let you go into the arts, and I want to kind of direct this maybe to Candice. Is like there is a living now, and I think we're seeing here in Hong Kong in the art ecosystem. I was at M Plus earlier this morning. About 20 years ago, I think last thing any of the young people in Hong Kong will want to talk about is becoming an artist. But now there is this creative, Hong Kong, Asia, this wonderful ecosystem. And in Hong Kong, we've always had, like Canto, before the Canto Pop, the movies, and so on and so forth. But I do think, Candice, that would you encourage you have kids. Now, if your kids come to you and say, Mom, I want to be an actor, playwright, I mean, what would you say to your kid who, I know you have a young kid, and is that something, do you see a trend here in Hong Kong with families saying, okay, you can do whatever you want, including being an actor, including being an artist? I mean,
I think my generation is, you can do what you want to do. But deep in my heart, I want to say, no, don't be. No,
you're still a Chinese mom.
Not because earning money or not that kind of thing. I just think being an, writer is very enjoyable, but also very very hard because it's self-criticizing and then a lot of things too. But of course they can do whatever they want to do. Yeah.
I mean, I actually have a daughter who has decided that she wants to write for television. So I'm having that experience of the kids going into the family business. And I yes, of course, it's the child should do what they want to do. And it's a little bit of it can be an unstable profession, but on the other hand, I feel like, at least in America, the only things we make in America that the rest of the world wants to buy anymore are entertainment, weapons, and high tech. So it's actually still it's a very viable industry. It's just you navigate it differently than a career that has a more set path.
And I think I'm seeing it too in writing. I mean, I mentioned earlier Partner Track, the show on Netflix, but it was based on a book written by somebody I met in New York, Hwang, who was a lawyer and decided that she wanted to give writing a chance. And another lawyer, those of you who read Interior Chinatown, I had a chance to interview Charles Yu.
Which is becoming a TV show.
Yes, and well, he also was writing for Westworld. He said he finally got he realized he could become a writer because his brother was already in writing for television, and he gave up a very lucrative corporate law job to become a full-time writer for Westworld, and then the book. So you're seeing the writing side of it. It used to be, I remember when, some of us know Amy Tan, when Amy Tan's book came out, Joy Luck Club, again, 30 years ago, was a big deal. And now you're seeing Asian or Asian American writers, and some of them writing in their own native language. I remember all the book written in Korean, All About My Mother. I think the author was on this stage. The Lit Fest brought her here. So there seems to be, our stories are being told, at least in the novels, and so. And now we're seeing it in, television and so on and so forth. Not so much in other art form, but we're seeing it. So it sounds like the trend is positive. So in fact, I don't have any kids, but if I do have kids, I kind of go for it. Be in front of the camera or in front of or behind it and this is where I kind of with Hong Kong, what Candice said earlier about everybody, and even this summer when I was home, everybody's worried about Hong Kong, asking about Hong Kong. But then write about. I actually would encourage young people here in Hong Kong. The world is your oyster. People want to hear your stories. Nobody can write your stories, but you. And I think David demonstrated that. And you made a really good career out of it. And you've opened the door. Seriously, I think Joanna said, you second and third generation. And you've always been there. I think when I was at MoCA, you were very much you kind of have this unique ambassador. You're well known globally. You have fans in I know in UK and in the theater world in the UK. But you also have Chinatown. You're as admire there. So I'm really glad that you're here. And that's another reason we wanted to bring David. And I want to thank again Chinese University of Hong Kong for doing that. I just feel like this crossroad, this back and forth is really important role for Hong Kong to play, especially during this time of division. We're hearing, I grew up in Ohio, and those of you know, and in the U.S. now, and not just the U.S. Everywhere in the world, there's kind of this us and them. And our voices, our stories needs to be heard. And I remember seeing Hamilton a couple of years ago when it first came on, before it made a big hit, to have somebody like a Philippa Sue, she's Chinese American, her father is Chinese, playing the lead, and she was great. And then Lin-Manuel is also from he's grew up from Puerto Rico. His parents are from really active in the Puerto Rican civil rights community. So you I'm sure because also of your work in public. So can you also talk about that trend? It's not just Asian American, but I think maybe and you mentioned it yesterday too. It's kind of now Broadway is realizing, or in the theater world is realizing, you kind of have the pathway to include everybody. Inclusion. Maybe George Floyd has something to do with that, and Black Lives Matters, and the anti-Asian hate. But can you kind of talk about that trend in the United States, which some of us worry about? But is it equalizing? Is it do they still want to hear our voices?
Yeah, I think stories by all sorts of people, stories that come from BIPOC communities with characters of color, general audiences in America are interested in them, and it's you can't the demographic slice of kind of older white people that tends to be the audience for, particularly for theater, also for opera. You can't base a whole field just on a piece of the pie that keeps shrinking, and even and more importantly, artistically, there are stories that haven't been told yet. And that's incredibly exciting. You don't have to tell the same sorts of stories over and over again. And I often tell my students that, the thing that makes you different, the thing that makes you idiosyncratic, the thing that makes you weird, that is your superpower as an artist, because that's the story that nobody else can tell. And so that works on an individual level. It also works on the level of different communities, different nationalities, of class, of just all the various ways that people grow up and experience the world. Each of those is a sort of plot of soil where that's fertile, that plants can grow, and that's how art is made.
I want to talk to Ken and Joanna too about now the other besides plays. You guys know New York, and New York now, Lincoln Center has a new, our architect Billy and Todd has helped finish off the Giffen Hall. I mean, you now have a wonderful a new theater reconfigure for, in New York, and it's kind of the music scene and the opera scene. Are you seeing changes too in that? Those two, people like Yap van Sweden are Hong Kong Phil's. He's also New York Phil's conductor. And so, what trends are you seeing in the classical music world and the opera world?
You start. I let the husband start.
Okay. Well, I still cover classical music quite a bit
Correct.
professionally as a critic, so I've seen a lot of changes in that, and music was actually ahead of the curve in this type of thing, because Tan Dun, Bright Chang, Chin Yi, Zhou Long, we used to call them the Gang of Four when they arrived at Columbia, and Joanna did go to school with them at Columbia at that point.
But I was a lot younger.
And so they came in at a time when music really opened up, and composed music at that point had gone through several eras of a very self-referential modernist ideal where you relied directly on your forebears, and they gave up tonality a long time ago. Who cares about your audience anymore? You're writing on a very highly intellectual level, and in many ways the audiences fled that. All of a sudden, they started coming back, and it was the generation of George Crumb, of minimalists like Philip Glass, who wrote tonal music, and they thought through different things, but with a certain rigor that they couldn't be dismissed by the other intellectuals. And at that point, you also didn't have to pretend that you didn't play in jazz bands or rock bands. All of that was part of your musical life that you brought to the table when you composed a piece. And so you had a lot of people like the composer collective Bang on a Can, which came here, is very rock influenced in their background. They were exactly that generation. But then you have people like Osvaldo Golahov, who David has worked with, who Israeli-Argentine composer, who came in saying, tango and klezmer, that's my folk music, that's my rock band. Tan Dun came in saying, ritual music, Peking opera. So they all came in, and they were all following the same recipes, but they all had very different ingredients. And when they brought this to the table, the color spectrum of what they could produce became very, very different and very vibrant in ways that music hadn't heard in basically ever. And it was particularly in America where this happened. Europe looked at it, befuddled for 20 years. But so this was sort of laid a lot of groundwork for that in ways that they were telling their story, but it was very diffuse. It wasn't an overt narrative. It wasn't in many parts an actual. It didn't rely on text. It didn't rely on anything like that. But when you follow the recipe with different ingredients, pretty soon the recipe changes, and so a lot of that music has changed. And the next generation, like Du Yun, who's been here, the next generation of composers, comes in and doesn't necessarily follow the previous generation of Chinese composers. She just has a whole huge menu to offer where Chinese is over in this column. And so that's kind of how that. At this point, it doesn't really matter in many degrees what your personal background is. It is what your experience is, and where you come from, and what you've done with it.
Okay, now I speak. I want to talk about actually with these changes and also with different people appearing on stage, whether it is the theater stage, opera stage, music, you actually attract a new audience. And I think the audience building is actually all part of what is happening in the past 2 decades. And also, a lot of the institutions realize that, yes, they need younger audience, but they also need diverse audience, because without a diverse audience, it is not real. I mean, it's literally unreal, because you cannot sustain. I mean, it's really about sustainability. If you want to actually build an audience base, you need to make sure your audience base will continue to be kind of alive.
Kind of grow with you, yes.
And go with you. And so that type of outreach, I think, is very much active. And all the theaters that I've worked with, opera companies, education is such an important part of what they do.
That's probably the single biggest thing that came up in between Chinglish and K-pop, which is the fact that there are entire divisions of companies now that stress, diversity, inclusion, which is not just about audiences and who sits in the seats, but what kind of programming do we do? What kind of people do we offer a platform to speak? And that is really across the board now. Even in opera, which is probably one of the slowest moving art forms, but across the New York Philharmonic, women, composers of color, they're getting a platform that they have never had before.
Well, we have Rumiko here. I wanted to recognize More Than Musical, and because one of the stuff that Rumiko has done here in Hong Kong is really doing opera differently and musical, growing a new audience. And this is something that we're really excited about in terms of our collaboration, whether it's our own Mila and I think last time, David, you were here, might have been when Arts Festival was doing Red Chamber.
Dream of the Red Chamber.
Red Chamber with you, Bryce Shun, and Stan, and also is it
Tim
Tim?
Yip.
Tim with the costume. So that was a very successful, I thought, a collaboration co-commissioned by Hong Kong Arts Festival and San Francisco Opera. So I'm really excited to see that trend. And even you were talking about women composers and conductors. I think San Francisco Opera now has a Korean.
Yunsun Kim, yes.
Yes, and then Santa Fe when. Carolyn
Kwan.
Yeah.
Karen Kwan from I think doing just conducting in. She also did Sun Yat-sen, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
She did there.
Yes.
But she also did Harvey Milk, which has
Harvey
no
Milk.
Asian component whatsoever,
And
in St. Louis this year.
and she's I think originally from Taiwan and now conducting in Connecticut.
Yes,
right?
yes,
yeah.
So it's really interesting to see that diversity, and that we didn't see 20 years before. And women composer, we've worked on this stage with Du Yun, and I have seen Angel's Bone in New York as well as here. So it's really interesting to see that. And then I think Glimmer Glass, which I was introduced to by a friend, the year I saw Glimmer Glass, it was called Blue, the opera Blue, about an African American family, police, gun violence, and all of that. And it was a really powerful, and I think.
By a composer that David worked with.
Janine, right?
Yes, it's Janine Tesori.
Right, you work with Janine for Soft Power. So one of the things I'm curious in then with Candice and you is talking about how do you write, go between theater and opera. I mean, which medium are you more are excited about? I mean, I'm sure each of them have its challenges. I know you work on Sun Yat-sen, you worked on Mila and other, operas and so on. And you too, in terms of going back and forth, so what are the challenges and what are you excited about when you're doing this back and forth?
For me, a big difference between the genres has to do with the question of who holds the primary artistic vision. That is, who is the decider, if you want to put it that way. If it's a play, I feel that, okay, I'm the decider. It's everybody, the other artists should be supporting my vision. But if I'm working on a movie, I feel that ultimately it's more of a director's medium. So, of course, I'm going to bring as much as I can to it, but I'm also trying to support someone's vision, even if it's my story. If it's an opera, this is not all librettists agree with me on this, but I believe the composer is the primary artistic person, the voice, if you will, because ultimately I think an opera is going to rise and fall on the music. The libretto does a tremendous amount to contextualize that music, to present it in a way that makes it dramatic. Because otherwise, if you don't have a story, you're doing a concert. But therefore, when I do a libretto, one of the things I try to do is create something that's going to help the composer to do their best work, and try to push their buttons in a good way. And if it's a television show, then it's the showrunner. Musicals are weird because musicals, you kind of have to do a mind meld between the book writer, the lyricist, the composer. Nowadays, sometimes the director. And that's why they're so hard to do, because you don't necessarily have one person who's in charge.
Yeah, I agree with David. Just that he put it in a nicer way. He's kind, but for me, I enjoy writing for theater more, just because I get more respect. And then when we write for movie, it depends. Sometimes when you have the director who respect you, then you feel like it's a collaboration. Otherwise, you feel like become a pen. And then, but I also enjoy musical writing for musical and opera, because I feel like it can let me express more dramatically, and then so. Yeah, but I understand. I agree with David that I think the composer is the boss. I mean, not the boss, but I understand that is their called for the up and down, and then I would be trying to submit more when I work with a composer. I feel like.
May I add something which is very important? Actually, being an opera librettist, you write far, far, far fewer words than if you were a playwright doing your own play.
Tough work.
I was just going to say that not all stories are created equal. So there's a lot of things that would make beautiful films and things that really the film is limiting, and the TV series is actually it gives you a chance to really open up and expand. But likewise, for the stage, there's things that a lot of times the interior world is much better expressed in music, and you can just give them a structure and let them run with it. How do you figure out sometimes whether a story should be, and do you debate whether, well, maybe we should do an opera of this, or maybe this should not be a play, maybe it should be something else?
So is it the second opera that I did with Hwang? It's called An American Soldier, and it's based on the true story of Private Danny Chen, who was a Chinatown kid from New York who enlisted in the U.S. Army at the age of 19 and was sent to the Kandahar region of Afghanistan and was basically hazed to death. So someone approached me with that story who was a woman named Liz Ouyang, who was a sort of a legal representative for the family, and asked if I wanted to make it into a play. And I didn't really, because I think the things that I'm working on play-wise, I'm kind of interested in like a lot of meta stuff and comedy, and it just didn't fit my aesthetic interests as a playwright. But then Hwang had a commission from Washington National Opera at Kennedy Center in D.C., and we were trying to think of something to do. And I thought, okay, actually, this Danny Chen story could be a great opera, because I feel like, and this is a very broad statement, but that opera, kind of deals in primary colors, and it's sort of big emotions. This is not a story that to my mind, has a lot of nuance. So it felt more like an opera to me, and that may or may not be. I think the opera turned out well, but that principle may or may not be correct in terms of applicable to all things. But it's an example of how I tried to decide if something was a play or an opera.
We're going to open it up to the audience. We have about 10, 15 minutes left, and definitely want you guys have an opportunity to ask this wonderful panelists your question. And if you don't, I have plenty more to ask. Okay, right over here.
Thank you very much. Seeing as all of you have spoken about these very different genres that are all interrelated, I wonder, it's quite an open question actually, about what you think about this kind of hierarchy that some people have about different theatre forms, because I was thinking about this yesterday actually at CU, because I had an undergraduate professor who really didn't want me to write an essay on Blood Brothers, because she was like, it's a musical, and was very kind of like, but I had the other teacher of the course actually specializes in science fiction theatre, so I was allowed to write it in the end. But I was kind of wondering what you all think of that, having, reviewed and written and worked in all these different forms. So kind of critically, but also artistically.
Yeah, I kind of don't support the notion that there's a big difference between so-called high art and so-called popular art, and it doesn't feel to me that different. If I'm writing a libretto for an opera at the Met or a Disney musical, I think it comes down to trying to support the story, find something that I connect with in the story, and then again this question of, am I the primary artist, or am I coming into this as a craftsperson trying to support someone else's vision?
But I find it interesting because I think opera in this now it's become such a high art, but it was the pop art of its day, correct? And so what you said about Disney musical, and there are a lot of similarity. You're working on quite a few. You've done a really great job in updating one of the Disney musicals. Can you talk about some of the work you're working on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've written 2 Disney musicals for Broadway. A pop Aida with Elton John and Tim Rice that we are now reviving, and I've sort of it's now we're doing our own revisical of it because I've rewritten about 80% of the book for the new production, and an adaptation of the Disney animated Tarzan for Broadway with music by Phil Collins, and I'm also working on a new film version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, like a live action. So I do a fair amount for Disney.
I would say as a critic, when I review something, my own personal taste enters into it, but it's really about what are the intentions of the piece, what are the intentions of the artist, and I've seen way too many reviews come out of criticizing a piece for what it's not rather than what it is. And that kind of annoys me. I mean, that you can put that in, you can talk about it, but you really shouldn't lead with it. That shouldn't be the point.
Hi, thank you for a great sharing. I just wonder in terms of the writing process, because I believe the Asian, Chinese lived experience and the Asian American experience is very different. And so when you do the writing and it's translated on stage, how do you remain, I guess, authentic to those experiences? Is that part of your consideration when you do the writing, or is it part of the primary artistic decider's point of view?
Sorry, I'm not the writer, but you're talking about authenticity, right? In telling the story, that the story actually is based on things that are really well researched, shall we say? Is that something that you're asking? If that is, then maybe David and Candice can talk about how we prepared Chinglish. That level of authenticity and detail of creating Chinglish was just amazing.
Well, it was largely you guys too, also. So, but Candice, why don't you start?
Authenticity. 真實性.
research, man?
No, but
guys
you
go
also
to-
did the research.
No. I mean, you guys go to the province.
Basically, what happened is that when David was interested in Chinglish, we actually went to the places in China, and you know, created situations in which David really could feel some of those scenes unfolding, as well as the setting of places. And also earlier on, David wrote another play, Yellowface, which also had a setting of a place in China. Similarly, he went there and did the research. And with that, I think brings in, you know, again, very much the authenticity of how it was, how it feels.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from my aspect, you came away from a lot of situations that, and many of the situations in Chinglish came out of actual encounters, and with a really powerful emotional sense. And you put that, you conveyed that as directly as you could on the paper while it was still fresh. And then you went back for the details. And then you clarified it to make sure, okay, did this really happen? What really happened? And we would get calls from you at just very weird times.
Late
all
at
hours,
night.
saying, would that meeting have ever happened in a karaoke bar?
Yeah, I mean, so look, you try and do your research as much as you can. That said, I mean, I do think that there, as you say, there is a pretty large difference between being a Chinese American, Asian American, and a Chinese national, or for that matter, a Hong Konger, or you know, or someone from Taiwan. There are those distinctions, which I think one also has to recognize your own positionality and your own lens. And I felt like with Soft Power, the more recent show, I at least wanted to be transparent about the fact that anything that I was writing about that was Chinese, like root culture Chinese, was being filtered through the lens of a Chinese American, because I've become actually somewhat more conscious of the degree to which, okay, I know a little bit and I do my research, but it's not exactly the same as being someone from that culture.
And I have to say, the only criticism I heard here in Hong Kong Chinglish was from somebody who says exactly that, oh, it's your interpretation as Chinese American. So some of the criticism, some of them, I wouldn't say criticism, they were saying, oh, it's not that it's not real, but it was through your lens. And I thought, well, yeah,
whose
he's
other
the
lens would
playwright.
you have? I mean,
Well,
really.
Right, he's the playwright. I mean, I didn't mean to be good, but I think she was. I think the criticism was like, you know, and in some ways, this is another reason I wish other people. I mean, Chinese or Hong Kong, you know, we all pen is mightier than the sword, and write it. And in fact, I think during Mila, I also had somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, not how dare you," but he said, you know, it should have been better done as a musical rather than an opera. Right, that was one comment I received from people. But again, it's like, well, we made a decision, made a choice, and each one of us have our lens. And in this Chinglish, the playwright was David Henry Hwang, who is David Henry Hwang. He's not, you know, Huang Da Wei, right? So I think sometimes the criticism, and I hear it also from my friends in mainland too, criticizing Chinese American writers who are not Chinese enough. And I'm like, what does that mean? I mean, I'm sure some of you haven't gotten that, right? I'm not Chinese enough. And or what does it mean to be Chinese? And this is an area where I think you guys we've all have kind of come up with that struggle of, you know, who you know, this kind of goes back to the identity question, right? I didn't mean to grow up in a state. My parents took me there as an immigrant, right? So I'm Chinese American, and I think being that authentic voice, which is something that I've always admired, all of us, all of you guys, because we're who we are, but it being that interpreter, I think this is an area where I find that there's not enough story about people who look like us on anything, and when there is something like this, we should celebrate it. And yes, criticize, if it's not, call it out for if you don't agree with it. But we don't all have to agree on the same thing, right? We agree to disagree, but doesn't mean we have to. There isn't authentic, like a real Chinese. I mean, again, who's real? And so I'm sorry. I mean, I have to throw that in and there's a question back there, and then we'll move up. Okay, back. Oh, okay, right here. Okay, let's hear first, and then back there.
All right, thank you so much for the discussion. David, I remember you mentioned earlier about how when you were younger, you didn't want to see media examples with Asian actors because of the Asian stereotypes that would be at play. And I've just been thinking a lot about how in different like TV shows or other entertainment like mediums, I think like more and more people are using stereotypes as a way to kind of find empowerment. Like, for example, especially in drag communities or in like the TV show like Fresh Off the Boat. So I was just wondering what all of your thoughts are on using stereotypes in the space of Asian American theater as a way to find empowerment instead of further marginalization.
Recently I just got my play just got some criticism about this. So I'm also thinking about this because I write a play called We Are Gay. So basically it's about gay community. And then some audience really love it. It's always like this. And then some audience will say that, oh, this is a stereotype. But I was thinking when I unless you say that straight people cannot write a play about gay people, otherwise I would say that I have tried my best to do the research, and that's why I invite a director who is also gay, and then we have a lot of designers. So when we were talking about Chinglish, writing from the Asian Americans' point of view, I was thinking we kind of agree with the whole process, right? Because that's why David invited me to be the translator, and then Ken and Joanna as the consultant, and we also have Asian actors in the cast. So that I can only say that we are trying not to write it or do it become stereotype, and that there are lots of depth in it. But I think I cannot control how it go to the audience, but I can only keep listening to what the audience says about which part being stereotype, and then why you have this feeling, and that kinds of things. Yeah, but for me, doing research is very important when I write a play about a minority who I'm, especially which I'm not part of it, but I have strong feeling, and then I need to have a strong feeling towards that group of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're also asking about kind of reclaiming stereotypes and trying to sort of empower oneself through them. And I feel like I've done that also probably more in my early plays. My sort of like FOB was definitely kind of a play that tried to play with some of the stereotypes of FOBs.
Fresh off the boat.
Fresh off the boat. I just assume people know what that means. But I think for me, it needs to kind of have a dual purpose. Like you need to kind of take the stereotype, but then also fill it in a way that humanizes it. So stereotypes are kind of bad writing, right? They're one or two-dimensional characters that are defined by some very kind of broad tropes. And then how do you take that and create a whole human being out of it? That, to me, is the challenge and the fun of trying to reclaim stereotypes.
Back there.
Thank you very much. I'm a little new at this, and so I may be a little naive in my questioning. But I have a certain question in respect of, for instance, we're looking to regionalize or differences of being Chinese. And I happen to think of many, many cultures that exist on Earth. Chinese culture is probably one of the strongest and one of the most tenacious. So although you may have been born in Chicago or Beijing or Africa, there is some deep commonality in our beliefs or in our values. I find it a very tenacious group of people, and we tend to maintain those values subliminally and consciously. So the distinction here that we're all making about differences, I think it's minutia, and I love Alice's point that we should be celebrating that we now have Asian representation, no matter from where you come. Which leads to my question to David. You distinctly identify yourself as a Chinese American artist. May I ask why? If, for instance, if I deal with the conductor and he comes from Finland, or he comes from America, we don't say Finnish American conductor. We may identify him with his ethnicity or his background, but there must be a very pointed reason in your career that you so identify. So that was a question for you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I guess I feel like fundamentally I'm an American in that I was born in Los Angeles and I don't really speak, which is sad. And I've spent most of my life in America, but I also identify as being of Chinese heritage, and sometimes I call myself Asian American too, because I find that term Asian to be pretty uniquely American in the sense that over here, the root cultures don't necessarily think of themselves as Asians. Japanese people think of themselves as different from Chinese people, etc. And only in America is there this sort of commonality in the way that we experience our lives, which makes, I think, my life as a Chinese American has sort of more in common with someone who's a Japanese American or Vietnamese American than with a root culture Chinese. So, yeah, I feel like it's the most accurate description of who I am.
We are running out of time, and so any other question? Okay, Edmund? This will be the last question.
Earlier in the presentation, you were talking about multi-language in a play. Now, I remember in the movie Drive My Car, they were doing Uncle Vanya in 5 different languages. May I ask, what element do you think that would make it work in a modern theater? That if you speak 5 different type of languages, how can you capture the audience that way? For example, in your play.
Oh, was that question? You can talk about Kang's work.
Oh, yeah.
We were just most recently seeing Trojan Women at BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, only 2 weekends ago. Was it only? Only 2 weekends. And it was all in Korean. But I can tell you one thing: the translation of those subtitles were exquisite. When you have good subtitles, you actually are able to get the meaning and the impact of the drama.
Now, the night before, we were at a performance of K-pop, which, as it has been criticized by some people, is saying, well, they're speaking Korean and not translating. But in the context of the show, someone will ask a question in Korean and the response will come in English, and which is actually a reflection of life in Hong Kong, because people will answer a question in a different language than they're asked. And by the answer, you certainly know what the question was. So you don't need a translation. And nobody should need a translation. And yet, I think that's sort of a willful barrier that the audience member puts up, that they're not really willing to go with the show.
However, there are plenty of audience members who are now so used to living in multilingual environments that they just keep on listening to all different types of languages all the time, that it is so very natural.
I think the only time in Chinglish that they didn't translate was when the main character, when the protagonist himself, was supposed to be confused. And so the audience was confused too.
Yeah, and so but specifically to this question about 5 languages, I mean, I feel like the Singaporean director Keng Sen didn't he do like a number of works where there were people from different Asian cultures and they all spoke in their own languages
and sing in their sing or perform in their own genre.
And
so that was King Lear.
It was sort of a post-literate approach to the art form, meaning that Shakespeare was not about language. You had a kabuki actor and a Peking opera actor and performing the characters in their own roles, in their own styles. But the audience ideally should just sit back and go with the flow of this and the style and the emotional content rather than the verbal content.
And the other example I might give, it's only 3 languages, but those of you who've seen the television series adaptation of Pachinko, the use of sort of English, Korean, and Japanese using different colored surtitles to indicate the different languages.
Yeah, and I remember also in Mila, there were actually that was projection of different languages. So there was Chinese, there was Tagalog, as well as English. And yeah, I mean, now we have technology. There is no excuse. We definitely can do it.
Well, I often look. In fact, I remember when I first saw Wild Boar, and my Cantonese was not very good then, but I was too. You could still capture the emotion, and part of the fun is like, again, I go to opera. I don't understand, the languages, but again, the emotion and the storytelling come through. So I think also maybe now, I think the audience now are so used to. Back then used to be, foreign language films, forget it, right? 20, 30 years ago. And now, like you said, Pachinko, you're seeing more of that. And in some ways, that's kind of, I think, reality, isn't it? We're all, it is a great trend. So before I wrap up, I want to ask you guys, each of you, final question. What are you guys working on right now that you want to share with us? Just short and sweet.
I'm working on an adaptation on Mahabharata.
What?
Mahabharata.
Mahabharata.
For Deng Shuang's studio. Yeah.
Great.
That's going to be in Hong Kong. Wonderful. And both Ken and I are helping with some outreach for the I Sing Suzhou project that will be performing with the Philadelphia Orchestra in January in Philadelphia and also in New York. And that is the setting. Contemporary composers setting Tang Dynasty poetry.
And in addition to some big projects, I'm doing annotation for the New York Phil. I'm doing a few other, following opera in various places around the world. And we just got back from Madrid from the International Opera Awards, where I was on the jury, Joanna's on the board. And so it's been almost back to full-fledged travel.
And Santa Fe Opera, which M. Butterfly had its world premiere just this past summer, was the festival of the year.
Let's see. So this new version of Aida, the pop Aida, starts in Holland in March, I think. And then I'm also creating and show running a television series based on some of you may be familiar with the 1MDB scandal. Jolo, who conned $6 to $8 billion out of the sovereign wealth funds of Malaysia and the United Arab Emirates, and so I'm creating a TV show about that whole incident.
Wow, that sounds a lot of things to look forward to, and that kind of gives us an idea of how the rest of the world is opening up. And I'm hoping for us too that we'll see some of this, whether it's on TV or coming live. There's nothing that beats live theater, so I'm live performances, opera, music, and so on. And tonight, I think Hong Kong, there's a lot of stuff happening. I know Tan Duan is in town doing something with LCSD at the Chini Nunnery, and then Hong Kong Phil, and we're going to see a world premiere of a play.
Yeah, Hong Kong Repertory Theatre doing a Top Restaurant, which is first time in Cantonese new production.
So really exciting things happening, and I'm in Asia Society Hong Kong will continue to be bringing you more programs like this, and then those of you grab check out our website. Blurring the Color Line starts, I think, December 8th next week. We have a wonderful documentary by Crystal Kwok, and we will be speaking to Crystal. I think she'll be zooming in from Hawaii. The documentary is about her. I think she worked in Hong Kong about 10, 15 years ago, and the documentary is about her growing up and as an Asian American in the South and the kind of the race relations. So we're really excited. That documentary is winning a lot of acclaims, and we're really excited to be showing it here at Asia Society next week. So thank you all for being here, and I'm so glad to see all of you here in person, even though half your face. But thank you, and we look forward to welcoming you back for future programs. And all right, good afternoon.
Thank you.